I don't want to go all Franklin Delano Roosevelt on you here as we are well into the first full weekend of college football. But I couldn't resist because, let's be honest, if Alabama loses its opener in Tallahassee on Saturday, a Great Depression will fall among the Crimson Nation. And World War III may break out within the staff, the roster. I'm exaggerating, of course. I'm not predicting that. We will make a prediction at the end of the show. I'm Kevin Skarbinski. This is ScarboKnows, and we're going to dive headfirst into the Alabama-Florida State game. Kicks off at 2:30 or so Central Time on Saturday afternoon. Can't wait for that one. We got great football tonight with Auburn and Baylor. And then Ohio State, Texas to start the day tomorrow. And then the afternoon matinee, Alabama, Florida State. First thing we want to do is say thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services, right here in Birmingham, Alabama. You can access them from anywhere in the state, anywhere in the Southeast. They're a family-owned, fee-only financial services company. You'll hear a little bit more about them later in the show, so stay tuned for that. Rice family, good people. They'll take great care of you. All right, we have to get into this because the most interesting, tantalizing aspect of Alabama at Florida State is the return of the Gus. Now, some people may say Gus Malzahn has lost his mojo, that he's not what he used to be, that defenses have caught up to him. And I say, nay, nay, nay. Not so fast, my friends. Mini tribute to Lee Corso heading to his final appearance on College Game Day on Saturday morning. Gus, at his best, is Alabama's nemesis. Now, if you're an Alabama fan, you already know this, and you probably don't want to be reminded of it. And you certainly don't want to see receipts. But, of course, I brought receipts because that's what I do. You have to have something to back up your opinions if you're a columnist, a commentator of any quality. So I brought receipts. So we're going to look at this in two stages, if you will, because Gus had two different stints against Alabama at Auburn. His first stint, of course, was as the offensive coordinator for Gene Chizik from 2009 to 2011. So let's look at some of the highlights from an Auburn perspective, from a Gus Malzahn perspective, lowlights from the Alabama side. Now, Alabama did have a winning record against Auburn during those 3 years, but even from the very start, Alabama knew Gus Malzahn was going to be a problem. In that very first Iron Bowl with Gus on the sideline in 2009, Alabama rolled into Jordan-Hare Stadium, undefeated, number one in the country, headed towards a national championship date with Texas. All they had to do was swat little brother aside and move on to the SEC championship game to take on the team that really stood in their way, in their minds, the Florida Gators, who had won 2 of the previous 3 national champions. But Auburn and Gus Malzahn said, not so fast. Hold on, big brother. And in the first quarter, Auburn jumped out to a 14-0 lead on one of the best defenses we've seen in the BCS college football playoff era of college football, led by Rolando McClain at middle linebacker, who Alabama fans will remember, and not fondly, which is one of the wildest stories of my career, I put Rolando McClain first on my Heisman ballot in 2009 because I thought he was the best player in the country. He was the best player on the best side of the ball at Alabama. No offense to Mark Ingram. I had him number 2 on my ballot. And somehow I may have been the only person in the history of Heisman balloting to rank Alabama players 1, 2, and get hammered by Alabama fans. But I'll save the rest of that story for another time. But Gus gave Alabama all it wanted. Jumped out to a 14-0 lead, and the first touchdown, this was so Gus, was a 67-yard wide receiver reverse. Terrell Zachary went the distance. He was all by his lonesome. Complete trickeration. Alabama, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, 2 of the best defensive minds ever in college football. We're not expecting that. And Alabama had to drive late in the game to win the game. And then, of course, the next year in 2010, everyone remembers the comeback. It makes some people want to go out back and lose their lunch if crimson is your favorite color. Of course, Alabama led that game 24-0 in Tuscaloosa. And Auburn, on the strength of Cam Newton's arm, not his legs, he did score a rushing touchdown, but he threw for 3 passing touchdowns, including the game winner to Philip Lutzenkirchen, the late Philip Lutzenkirchen. May he forever rest in peace. So Gus showed right off the bat in his first 2 games against Alabama as an offensive coordinator that he was going to give Nick Saban and Kirby Smart fits. 2011 game wasn't very competitive. We're not going to talk about that one. And then Gus was smart, not dumb. He was smart to leave Auburn after the 2011 season. I don't know if he saw what was coming, the train wreck in 2012, but he went and spent a year as a head coach at Arkansas State. Got that under his belt. And then he came back for chapter 2 in the Gus versus Alabama saga as the head coach at Auburn in 2013. Let's look at some of Gus's greatest hits in the Iron Bowl against Alabama as the head coach at Auburn. He was 3-5. And you may say, well, it's a losing record. How good can that be? If you know anything about the Iron Bowl, if you know anything about the Nick Saban era, you know that 3 wins over that Alabama team during that period in Alabama history was extremely significant. And, of course, it started with the kick 6. And everyone remembers the last play of that game. The missed field goal, Chris Davis ran it back 109 yards. They couldn't keep him off the field that night in Jordan-Hare Stadium. But look at the stat. And I'm going to share a story with you in a minute. Gus remembers that number. Auburn ran against a Nick Saban, Kirby Smart defense for 296 yards. 296 yards. And if that weren't enough, the next year in 2014, with Nick Marshall back at quarterback again, a much improved thrower the next year, Nick Marshall threw for 456 yards against the Alabama defense. Again, Saban, Smart, 456 passing yards. Now, Alabama won that game. They beat Gus at his own game. That was Lane Kiffin's first year in Tuscaloosa. It ended up 55-44. Incredible football game, incredible fireworks. But think about that progression. 1 year, Gus's Auburn team runs for 296 against Bama. The next year, they throw for 456. And then in 2017, the next time that Auburn beat Alabama, Jarrett Stidham threw for 237. And then in 2019, with true freshman Bo Nix at quarterback, Auburn ran for 181 yards, and they beat Alabama 48-45. The last Auburn win in the Iron Bowl. Auburn was pretty balanced that day. Now, the offense didn't score all the points. They had a couple of pick sixes in that game. Mac Jones threw for over 300 yards. Unfortunately, he threw a couple of touchdowns to guys in Auburn jerseys. But this shows you what Gus Malzahn is capable of when he's going against an Alabama defense. So let's look at numbers. I like numbers. I like words more, but numbers don't lie. Numbers tell us something. Numbers tell a story. So in this era of domination by Alabama, when Gus Malzahn was facing the Crimson Tide, with the exception of 1 year, like I said, 2012, when Gus was the head coach at Arkansas State, he went against the Alabama defense 11 times and beat Alabama 4 times. No one did it more. And look at these numbers. Overall, in those meetings with Alabama, Gus's offense averaged 332 total yards. But if you extrapolate, if you take the games that I highlighted, 09, the close loss, 10, the comeback, 13, the kick six, 14, 55, 44, 17, Auburn wins 26-14 and wins the West and gets to the SEC championship game. And then 19, the 48-45 chaos on the Plains. In those 6 games, Gus's offense averaged 406, almost 407 yards against the Alabama defense. Points per game, same thing. Overall, respectable. A lot of people didn't score 24 points against those defenses at Alabama. But in those 6 years that we pull out, Gus's offense averaged 33 points, 33 and a half points against Alabama. The man knows how to run an offense. The man knows how to call plays. And now he doesn't have to worry about anything else. He doesn't have to worry about timeouts. He doesn't have to worry about special teams. He is the offensive coordinator at Florida State. That's all he has to do is draw up ball plays, make calls, when to go to that special place on the clipboard. And you know what this is? That's what this is. This is a clipboard. Auburn fans will remember not so fondly that Gus couldn't decide on and off. He was going to retire his clipboard. He was not going to retire his clipboard. He was going to let Rhett Lashley call the plays. He was going to be encouraged to let Chip Lindsey call the plays by important voices in the Auburn family, and thus the wild inconsistency of the Gus Malzahn era at Auburn. But at his best, when he's focused on drawing up ball plays in the dirt, when he's chopping on that double bubble, when he's downing 6 cups of coffee before breakfast, when his sole purpose in life is to move the football and put points on the board, he's really good at it. Now, he's not without his flaws. I wrote them down on my Gus clipboard here. His passing game is, well, elementary is a polite word for the Gus Malzahn passing game. He does not have sophisticated route trees. Now, maybe this may be different. Mike Norvell knows a thing or two about offense, the Florida State head coach. So maybe combined, Gus is best at putting together a downhill running game and using tempo to get the most out of that running game. And then when you least expect it, like the last drive in the 2013 Iron Bowl, when Auburn had to score a touchdown to tie the game, they ran the ball, they ran the ball, they ran the ball, they ran the ball. And then Nick Marshall rolled left, the cornerback for Alabama rolled up, and there was Sammy Coates all alone behind the defense. And Nick Marshall hit him with the pop pass. We had a tie game. And then moments later, the kick six ensued. So Gus's passing game on its own, not very difficult to figure out. But he'll have help with Mike Norvell. He's had help in developing the game plan with the Florida State head coach. Auburn fans will remember this, the third quarter siesta. How many times did we see Auburn jump out under Gus Malzahn and look really good early, like that 2009 Iron Bowl, his first encounter with an Alabama defense at Auburn. And before you could blink, it was 14-0 with a trick play. The kind of trickeration that sometimes Gus gets a little too enamored of. Sometimes he's guilty of trickeration overload. The 2016 opener against Clemson comes to mind. He decided to play 3-quarterback Monty with Jeremy Johnson, Sean White, and the star-crossed John Franklin. Didn't work out so well. They ended up losing to Deshaun Watson and the eventual national champions from Clemson, 19-13. They also unveiled a secret weapon, the Cox Cat. Chandler Cox, if you don't recall, was an H-back at Auburn, and Gus came up with the idea to put him at Wildcat, have him do some kind of awkward pirouette, and then try to run a read option. That didn't work either. So when Gus gets too cute for his own good, bad things happen. But if he can rein in those tendencies, you got trouble. Now, he's not going against a Nick Saban defense on Saturday. He's not going against a Kirby Smart defense or a Jeremy Pruitt defense. And Jeremy Pruitt, when he was the Alabama defensive coordinator, and then when he was the Georgia defensive coordinator, and when he was the Florida State defensive coordinator, the one year when FSU beat Auburn in the national championship game, completely flipped from the first half to the second half. He's going against Kane Womack's defense at Alabama. And Kane Womack and Gus Malzahn have a little history. They were both at Arkansas at the same time back in 2006 when Gus moved from high school coaching in the state of Arkansas, became the OC for Houston Nutt and the Razorbacks. And by the way, they won the SEC West that year, beat Auburn badly in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Kane Womack was a little-used fullback on that team. So there's a little bit of history there between Gus and Kane. I don't know if that'll have anything to do with the outcome of Saturday's game, but it's something to look out for. But that's not the only relationship here. Gus is not the only person on the Florida State travel squad. Well, not travel squad. They're at home. Excuse me. They're playing at home. He's the only person in the program. He's not the only person in the program that might have a little extra incentive on Saturday. Let's look at a couple of other guys who might have a little extra mojo, a little extra pep in their step when they hit that field on Saturday. Roydell Williams, of course, spent 4 years as a running back at Alabama before transferring to Florida State. He had a solid career in Tuscaloosa. His career high was 129 yards against South Florida back in 2023, a game where they really needed every one of those yards. And they came so close to losing a second straight game after dropping a home game to Texas. Ty Simpson, by the way, saved the day for Alabama. He never got enough credit for it then, kept them on track to make the playoff, which they did in Saban's last year. Roydell, a good running back, very good running back coming out of high school, Hueytown, Alabama, 5'10", 223. He didn't get a lot of run last year with the Seminoles. He was dealing with injury issues. You got to know he's going to want to leave his mark on this game. And I don't know how many people recall this or think about it much as they're projecting the outcome of this game. But Mike Norvell was not that far away from becoming the man who succeeded Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa. Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, had a short list. And the shortest part of the short list included 2 names. From what we understand from our reporting, from other reporting, obviously Kalen DeBoer was there, the man they eventually hired. But Mike Norvell was highly thought of by Greg Byrne. Mike Norvell was on that short list. Mike Norvell talked to Greg Byrne about the Alabama job, about succeeding Nick Saban. Now, the job didn't go to him. Obviously, it went to Kalen DeBoer. And that was when Mike Norvell was riding high, coming off a 13-1 season in 2023, an undefeated regular season, would have been in the playoff instead of Alabama had the quarterback not gotten hurt. Some people still think Florida State should have gotten that spot rather than Alabama. Some people thought there was a Saban bounce there, which often occurred throughout the playoff era, the BCS era as well. But Mike Norvell profited greatly from being on Greg Byrne's short list. He had just not that long before signed an extension with a raise at Florida State. He got another one This one that would pay him more than $10 million a year over the next 8-year period through 2031. So Mike Norvell has other incentive for his Seminoles to come out and make a statement on Saturday. They have to prove that 2-10 was a complete fluke a year ago, that that's not who he is, that's not what his program is. That is not going to be a season that defines him or Florida State under his watch. That going forward, they're going to look more like the 13-1 team of 2023. So they have got boatloads of incentive to come out and play well and make a statement and shock the world and beat Alabama. But deep down inside, coaches don't always admit this, but there is something personal. They rarely admit it publicly. I am doing this all year, and I hope you'll check it out. Alabama Public Television is doing a high school game of the week every Thursday night. Different high schools all across this state. And everybody in the state can get Alabama Public Television, which makes it even more special. And we did our first countdown to kickoff pregame show last night at the Benjamin Russell Central Clay County game. We had the two coaches on the set pregame, which was really cool. It was especially cool because the two coaches combined, Danny Horn has 8 state championships in Alabama, and Kirk Johnson, in his first year at Benjamin Russell, has 2 state championships. So to have two guys who combined have won 10 state championship, Danny Horn is the all-time winningest coach in Alabama football. Kirk Johnson is the winningest active coach in terms of percentage. He's 56-3 in 5 years. And Benjamin Russell ran away with that game last night. But sitting there, listening to those coaches, talking to those coaches, you could tell it meant something to them. First of all, there was a great mutual respect. And I'm sure there will be great mutual respect between Mike Norvell and Kalen DeBoer on Saturday. But you could tell it was personal. For Kirk Johnson, the young blood, he wants to be one day where Danny Horn is. He wants to be a legend over decades as a coach. And Danny Horn wants to hold on to that title. So he had a little extra personal incentive to try to keep the young guy, keep him down. Didn't work out so well last night for Danny and Central Clay. But I'm trying to make a point that personal things matter. Coaches take things personally. And here's where I'll share one of my favorite Gus Malzahn stories personally from my background. You know, in all the years that I worked for AL.com and the Birmingham News full-time, and I was a 4-time-a-week columnist, and so I would write things that would make coaches mad. Occasionally, those coaches would call to let you know about it. But in all the time that Gus Malzahn was at Auburn, the only time he called me to express his displeasure was late in his tenure. And I don't even remember the specific subject of the column in question. But I do know that I did reference the fact that a lot of people, when they remember the kick six, they remember the missed field goal. Chris Davis, 109-yard run back. They don't remember that Auburn ran for 296 yards in that game with Trey Mason at tailback and Nick Marshall at quarterback. And so I've always felt that people, especially if their favorite color is crimson, they kind of dismiss the kick six as a fluke. It was not a fluke. It was 2 outstanding football teams. It was 2 of the best 3 teams in the country, and you have to include Florida State in that number because they had an all-time great season that year under Jimbo Fisher with Jameis Winston at quarterback. But the Iron Bowl of 2013 was much, much more than the kick six. And in this column, I referenced this idea that many people had that it was a fluke, that Auburn didn't earn the victory, that Auburn Jesus showed up, as he often does, in the Iron Bowl in Jordan-Hare Stadium. And it was a passing reference. It wasn't even the entire subject of the column. And one day I'm in the laundry room in my house. Yes, I do laundry occasionally, not enough to my wife's liking, but my phone rings. And I look at it and it's Gus Malzahn. It was the off season. And I thought, okay, what's up? So he was upset because he thought I was saying that the kick six was a fluke. That game, the prayer and Jordan Hare a couple of weeks before. Now, that touchdown pass from Nick Marshall through a couple of Georgia DBs to Ricardo Lewis, that was flukish, shall we say. The overall game wasn't a fluke. That play was flukish. Not so the kick six, okay? But that bothered Gus, and he took the time to call me to tell me about it. And we had a pleasant conversation, and I explained to him that I had, among people who commented on the kick six when it happened and in years since, I'd always given Auburn credit for that game. And the thing that jumped out, the number that stood out, was 296 rushing yards. Not many teams, not many offensive coordinators, not many head coaches who focus on offense can say that they went against a Nick Saban, Kirby Smart defense, and one year their team ran for 296 yards. And the very next year, they went against that same elite defense, and they threw for 456 yards. And I say all of this to prepare you for what could happen in Tallahassee, Florida, on Bobby Bowden Field in Doak Campbell Stadium, starting probably about 2:37, 2:39 on Saturday afternoon. I don't know that Florida State has those kind of weapons. I don't know that Thomas Castellanos is that kind of quarterback. He's got a long way to go. He's a Dollar General Nick Marshall right now. He's capable of doing some special things. Yes, he's a dual threat. And you got to believe Gus Malzahn will unlock the best that Thomas Castellanos has to give. Roydell Williams is a threat in the running game. He's not Trey Mason. Not yet. He hasn't proven to be that. But we'll see. And I'm telling you, if Alabama is not locked in, if Kane Womack and company aren't dialed in their calls, if Alabama's depth up front isn't as good as they hope it is with Tim Keenan out, their outstanding defensive lineman, not a game you want to be shorthanded against Gus Malzahn calling plays on the other side. So who's going to win? As I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, I done told you through the years, I don't like predictions. I think they're not worth the paper that I scribble them down on or that anyone else scribbles them down on. I think they're fun. They're harmless generally. And I don't throw them out there for anything other than entertainment purposes, as the saying goes. But it would seem a bit wishy-washy, cowardly, whatever you want to call it, for me not to at least make a prediction. Okay? So, drum roll, please, maestro. Who's going to win the Alabama-Florida State opener on Saturday in Tallahassee? Let's see it. There you go. Now, I really believe Ty Simpson is going to be ready for his close-up. I really believe, as I mentioned earlier, he didn't get enough credit for what he did to save the South Florida game and in many ways save the season back in 2023. And you could say, yes, he failed to beat out Jalen Milroe when Nick Saban was the head coach. He failed to beat out Jalen Milroe when Kalen DeBoer became the head coach. But I think he's going to be more like Mac Jones. When his time comes, he'll be ready for his close-up. And if you recognize the numbers, and I do this a lot, just to see if you're paying attention. Alabama 34, Florida State 28. That, of course, was the score of the kick six. Gus Malzahn was on the right side of it in 2013. I believe he's going to be on the wrong side of it on Saturday afternoon. However, I believe he's going to give Alabama fits. He's going to have Kane Womack pulling his hair out. and thanking his lucky stars that he only has to face him once because they're in different leagues. That's all I got to say about that. All right, everyone. Enjoy this fantastic Labor Day weekend, week 1 of the college football season. We are in it now, folks, and it's going to get better and better the deeper it goes. And make sure you check out my friends at Money Management Services, our sponsor. The Rice family will take good care of you. All right, everyone. Take care. See you.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.